Hello, Kate. Before we start having your part of the interview, I would just like to show people who are watching that we have this beautiful painting of Gretel over here on the dining room wall. That painting was used also on the front of the book, Gretel's Cross. And behind Kate, we have an armoire that was brought by the family after the bombing in Stuttgart. So, Kate, you lived in Germany and worked for the Department of Defense Dependent Schools. How many years ago was that? What was that like?
It actually started in 1970, and I was there for 6 years. My first assignment was in the city of Bayreuth in North Bayern and Franken. And I stayed 1 year there, and then the other 5 years, as you know, is when you and I met at an army base in Stuttgart.
Uh-huh. Yes, that's right. Was there anything in particularly about living in Bayreuth that was interesting?
Yes, it was something totally by chance. Unfortunately, I wasn't as aware of what I was really involved in or in the midst of while I was there. We lived in the villages and taught on base, and our host nation teacher, which was a German who was assigned in every one of the schools to teach American children about the German area that they lived in, he helped us find apartments in the immediate area. And little did I know, when he found me a place to live, that I was entering the very erudite, illustrious world of opera in the form of the property that has been for a long time in the family of Richard Wagner.
Uh-huh. Well, did you know anything about the history of that estate before you moved there, or did you know anything about Richard Wagner and his operas?
Unfortunately not. I think I was amazingly naive, and music was not something, certainly not opera, that was discussed in my family. I certainly had heard of the name of Richard Wagner and his sort of flamboyant magical operas, but I basically knew nothing about it. And so when we first approached the house, entering through the walls of this beautiful estate, I simply thought, well, this is the home of a famous composer.
Uh-huh. Well, that was a logical thing to think. So somewhere about that time you must have met the landlady. She must have been something unusual, huh?
Well, little did I know that the house that I was moving into, where she had rooms to rent, was the living space for Richard Wagner's daughter-in-law, who was British, Frau Wagner, and her husband, who was deceased.
Wieland?
No, the man who was famous in the opera.
Wie heißt der Huber?
Anyway, her husband was Richard Wagner's son, and they themselves, I think, had 3 children. And so she was a white-haired lady, originally British, so she spoke English. And when I did rent the apartments, and the rooms, I should say, and it was quite spectacular. In this beautiful villa, upstairs was a long hallway with rooms off the side, and then her suite of rooms was at one end, and the rooms that I was renting was at the other end. And it was just really like walking into something in the 1800s, with beautiful curtains and furniture. And there were 2 bedrooms, and when I was first there, I did have a roommate, another teacher. And basically the beautiful back balcony looked over the grounds in the back and onto the public area beyond a fence where Richard Wagner and his wife were buried.
Wow, it sounds like the perfect place to live, huh?
Well, it was, for somebody who was bright-eyed and naive like me, I was like in a fairy tale castle. And for most of the time, coming and going, I would walk through the library inside the house, and Frau Wagner would be sitting in an area either playing the piano or looking through books. This was obviously the library of their music. And generally she would simply greet me, and then I would go up the spiral or curving staircase to my own rooms. So while I was there, I regret that I didn't throw myself into studying Wagner and the whole history. I was simply swept away by the beauty and history of the area in general. It was the time when the Cold War was still going on, and the East was divided from the West. And so we took beautiful trips into the countryside, into the woods and near the border of Czechoslovakia. And the German villages and towns were so interesting and captivating that that's where we spent all of our free time. So I was usually leaving the house, not studying the house and its own history.
Yeah, you know, I think that all of us look back on those periods of time sometimes with a little regret about what we wish we had done that we didn't do. You know, everybody does that. But it really is kind of too bad that you weren't able to sit and visit with Frau Wagner once in a while. I'm going to tell a quick story of my own.
Sure.
I saw her on German TV once in the 80s, and she was extremely arrogant when speaking German. She was extremely arrogant, and she was actually describing the immediate post-war period when Americans were using Villa Wahnfried as a headquarters building, and she was horrified that American GIs were bowling down that hallway towards your apartment. And when you mentioned the hallway, I remembered how she was just livid that they were so disrespectful. And I understand that, actually.
Sure, I certainly would understand it. It's a beautiful, beautiful home, or a villa. And later on, I did learn more of the history, basically from our host nation teacher, who became a good friend because his family, although he ended up moving to Stuttgart, and that's where I then transferred to work in the school where I met you, Marty. But his grandmother in Bayreuth had newspaper clippings from the war years, and it was just amazing to see my front door that I walked through every day, a much younger Frau Wagner in the newspaper photo, welcoming Hitler and his entourage to her home. And history and local folklore says that when Herr Hitler came to Bayreuth, of course he loved Wagner's music, and he came to the Festspiel, the musical celebration every year. When he came to Bayreuth, he either stayed in the military barracks for the officers, or he stayed with Frau Wagner in Wahnfried. And the house, the building on the estate where we lived was the, again, named after her husband, and also famous from the opera. I just can't think of that name. But anyway, that he would stay in that house, and that frequently that happened. And later on, my German friends said, where do you think Frau Wagner would put the Chancellor when he came to stay in her house? And obviously, not in her rooms upstairs or in one of these single rooms, but in the great suite of rooms where I was renting, because it had 2 bedrooms and a beautiful dining room and the gorgeous balcony that looked out on the grounds. And so I had to realize that indeed, very likely, Herr Hitler likely stayed in my rooms at more than once. And then my friend said to me, well, looking around this beautiful apartment, where do you suppose he would have slept? There was one small bedroom, and then there was one elegant bedroom with a full glass doors that opened onto the balcony, and gorgeous drapes, and an ancient gorgeous bed, and which I slept in every night. And I had to come to realize that yes, indeed, I likely slept in Hitler's bed, or the same bed Hitler slept in.
What effect did that have on you?
Well, it was rather chilling, because I did begin to read more about the time of the Nazis, as well as a little more about the Wagner family. And of course, we'd all honor and give credit to the musical genius of Richard Wagner. But the politics were quite troubling because of the focus on Nazism and white supremacy. And so when I actually realized, my roommate only stayed until December and went back to the States, so I was after Christmas by myself in the house. And I began to have really, really bad nightmares, almost nightly. and I would wake up to the sound, the eerie sound of this large owl outside hooting, and that has all sorts of connotations as well. So eventually I did feel that I had to leave. It was just too troubling, and it was coming near the end of the school year, and I moved in with friends for the last 2 months and then moved on to Stuttgart.
Wow, what a fascinating story. Well, naturally you and I have talked about this often over the last 40 years, but I never tire of hearing it. And for everyone who's watching our video today, I want to remind you that there's a place on the website on gretelscross.com. When you go to gretelscross.com, there's a space there that says share your story. And I'm so glad that Kate shared her story, so I will try to post this on the website, and if we run out of space, we'll definitely put it on YouTube. So Kate, thank you very much, and vielen Dank.
You're welcome.